Hello, and thank you for the introduction. I'm Graeme Wilkinson. I'm the head of the virtual R&D research function at the Medicines Discovery Catapult. The Medicines Discovery Catapult is an organisation, a not-for-profit organisation involved in the support of UK drug discovery companies. And together with Alzheimer's Research UK, we've been developing this target product profile for agitation in Alzheimer's disease. As we've heard today, we know and understand that Alzheimer's disease is becoming much more prevalent. And with that, there will be a concomitant increase, a parallel rise in the incidence and symptoms of the disease, such as agitation. And as we also know, there are few treatment options available for Alzheimer's disease patients who suffer from these symptoms of agitation. And in an attempt to stimulate innovation in this area, Alzheimer's Research UK wished to develop a target product profile that would help guide the discovery and development of new treatments and therapies. So MDC were commissioned to work with Alzheimer's Research UK for three reasons. First, to bring our knowledge of TPP development to this opportunity. Second, through our novel informatics group, to identify and collate data and about current drugs and drug development in clinical trials. And thirdly, to assist in customer stakeholder discovery by interviewing a number of UK-based small and medium-sized enterprises who we understood were interested in developing therapies for agitation, either through drug repositioning or de novo drug discovery. So, as I mentioned, we've heard somewhat about the scale and impact of dementia and agitation today. We've talked a little about the pipeline and current treatments, and here I'm focusing on the development of that TPP. And I'm going to describe the work that we conducted with Alzheimer's Research UK to develop that TPP and how that was brought together and combined with the patient insight and clinical know-how provided and accessed by Alzheimer's Research UK. And alongside that, later in today's session, we will hear also about parallel work streams to better understand the economic impact that new agitation treatments could deliver, which will be described later. So the purpose of the TPP is to provide the detailed requirements necessary for the development of new treatments and how they are effective, and to outline the steps needed to validate them in the clinic and before market entry. And in the following slides, I'm going to cover the following points: the target patient population, efficacy requirements, things like route to administration, and the goals for the TPP, and including in that the stakeholder interest, focusing on SMEs. And I'll go through a number of the elements that we went through at MDC, focusing, as I've mentioned, on discovery of the background data and stakeholder inputs. And then toward the end, we will quickly look at the TPP and some of the key elements that we've uncovered by bringing all this information together. So I'll be focusing specifically on the MDC-led elements with those particular areas of focus. But I think, first of all, it might be interesting to understand what a target product profile is and the purpose of those in drug discovery. So a target product profile, what are its purposes and objectives? So as you can see here on the left-hand side, the World Health Organization provides a description of a TPP. So a TPP outlines the desired profile or characteristics of a target product that is aimed at a particular disease or diseases. TPPs state their intended use, the desired target population, and other desired attributes of products, including safety, efficacy-related characteristics. In essence, it's what is required for a new therapy on the marketplace to intervene with unmet medical need. Outline the requirements for the patient in terms of efficacy and also the safety. And this is all in the context with the patient population. So in consideration of Alzheimer's disease patients, many will be living long lives and will therefore need to have very low safety impacts on their lives, but want something which is efficacious and helps with managing their symptomology. There are a number of key steps that we would need to consider here. For example, who the product is for, who's going to be using it. For example, not just the patient, but the clinicians. What's the gap in clinical practice that we're trying to address? Practical points such as how can the product made, at what type of scale and price, and this relates to the funding and commercial models in order to bring a new product to the marketplace. Can these be accessed by the intended user group? That is a broad range of potential users, not just in developed countries, but those where there are developing healthcare economies. And then what do I need to do as a drug researcher or company to meet these requirements? What is basically the data package that I need to generate in order to be validated, in order to convince a regulator that what I'm bringing to the market is fit for purpose? So that is basically the purpose of a TPP. And we use this understanding of that in order to drive forward the development of this TPP for agitation. It's important to consider who the TPP is for. So who are the key influences and stakeholders we need to consider? What are their needs? So here is probably a non-exhaustive list of some of those. So clearly the patients and clinicians who will be involved in taking and prescribing new medicines. The regulators such as the EMA, FDA and MHRA, who will be responsible for determining whether a new asset, a new therapeutic could be and should be launched into the marketplace. Payers, for example, NICE and others who will be responsible for determining whether or not the economic benefit derived from a new therapy outweighs the cost of it, and consideration of how we're going to be funding the research in order to develop these products forward. So all of these legitimate influencers and stakeholders' viewpoints need to be taken into consideration. So in developing this TPP, we took a three-stage process. In outline, they were doing initial scoping and research, they were consultation and key stakeholder engagement, and they were synthesis in bringing all of this information that we've collated together. And both Medicines Discovery Catapult and Alzheimer's Research UK were involved in all of these processes. And I'm going to concentrate now on some of the work that we did at MDC in the background research into understanding the data accessible from clinical trials, and then how we interacted with and learnt from the needs of some of our key stakeholders, primarily small and medium-sized enterprises. So we know that over the last few years, there's been a dramatic increase in the pace of drug discovery and development in Alzheimer's disease. And very many clinical trials have been registered on various websites such as clinicaltrials.gov and other platforms, including the European Clinical Trials Register. We can see here on the left-hand side the sharp increase in clinical trials registered in the mid-2000s and how that has remained relatively constant over the last decade and a half. Most of these clinical trials are to try and intervene with intervene with the process of Alzheimer's disease and to try and put right some of those basic biological artifacts, including we know many drugs aligned to non-symptomatic relief and treatment of the underlying causes. But there are an increasing number of clinical trials which have also sought to look at agitation and related symptomatic conditions. And what we wanted to do was strip out from all of the Alzheimer's disease clinical trials those which have specifically looked for agitation and related symptoms, and how these were measured, what types of trials were performed, what types of measurements were performed, and how that could be used in order to guide the development of our target product profile. So we went into a variety of different databases and searched many of those for those clinical trials, looking at 5 main areas. the overall number of Alzheimer's clinical trials and where they overlapped with other symptoms such as depression, sleep difficulties, agitation, and also aggression, which, as I think many of us know, is also a subset of the agitated behaviours displayed by some Alzheimer's patients. When we then stripped much of that information back to trials looking at drug entities, so where new drugs are being looked at, you can see here on the bottom the numbers of trials that we're talking about. So with respect to agitation, you can see the overlap between agitation and aggression, and the numbers of trials that also overlap with sleep issues and depression. And we took all of these together through a structured process to bring back the data associated with those. Now, on this slide, you can see the data filtering processes that we went through at MDC to identify these typical outcome measures that were being looked at in a variety of different trials. So as I've mentioned, we used certain search terms and query terms such as Alzheimer, depress, aggression, agitation, sleep, insomnia, etc. Those specific word stems which allow us to look at the all contexts of those words in all of these clinical trials. We looked through a variety of databases. I've mentioned things like clinicaltrials.gov, etc., and brought out all of those trial terms in Alzheimer's disease. And we came up with a relatively large number of trials, which then required further filtering. So the first thing we did was just strip that back to drug-based interventions only, which came to a smaller number, and then refiltered those for those word stems that I've already mentioned. We also need to remove a number of these because, for example, there are clinical trials ongoing in oncology where aggression or aggressive is used to describe aggressive cancers, and so all of those needed to be stripped out as well. So this was quite a lengthy informatics process using machine learning, but ultimately we identified 76 clinical trials where Alzheimer's disease was being studied as the root trial, but also where symptoms of agitation, including aggression, potentially sleep, and depression were also involved. And from that, we were able to determine the outcome measures that were being looked at, the various scales that were being looked at in those trials, in order to then have that as the background information that would form the basis of our target product profile. So this is just one of the processes that was undertaken by MDC in order to bring back that raw data which informed the target product profile. And this was then taken together with all of the other data provided by Alzheimer's Research UK colleagues, and which resulted ultimately in the target product profile, which I'll touch on in a few slides' time. As I've also mentioned, it was important to understand the views of key stakeholders, so the users of these TPPs. And a number of those key stakeholders are identified here. I've mentioned clinicians, health economists, patients and caregivers. And in the context of MDC's community, we were commissioned to interview a number of UK-based small and medium-sized biotech enterprises. And we talked to CEOs and CSOs in a number of those organizations. And it's fair to say that everyone we talked to was really favorable about what we were trying to achieve here, thinking it was a really valuable opportunity for the community and would bring specific certain benefits in drug discovery in this area. And to summarize that industry feedback, as I mentioned, the SME community that we talked to felt that it was extremely valuable to have such tools on hand and available. They had benefits such as bringing the community together, raising the profile and importance of the need for new symptomatic treatments. SMEs often find that they don't have access to target product profiles in a relatively facile way and have to, off their own back, go and commission their development, which can be a lengthy and costly process. And many of the organizations that they do commission don't have the necessary background knowledge and expertise that organizations like Alzheimer's Research UK and their network of experts might have. It was felt that the TPP, combined with health economic modelling, which we also mentioned was being conducted, is really important to help drive strategy and inform both preclinical and clinical trial plans, and help plan to the market in terms of what the ultimate opportunity would be for the development of these, both for patients, for caregivers, and for the companies doing the drug development. SMEs also felt that TPPs are critical for them in their conversations with investors. I mean, it goes without saying that in order to develop a new drug to the marketplace is a very costly endeavor, and an investor needs to be convinced that there is a real market opportunity before they're going to fund such research. SMEs envisage a number of uses, and some of those are outlined here, particularly qualifying those models and how they are translated from the preclinical setting into the clinic, allowing them to forecast the market opportunity, such as net present value calculations and inform commercial decisions, and basically where to map how to get there. So in order to develop a so-called line of sight to the clinic, and then in order to determine what needs a new asset requires in order to bring this to the market. So in all, this stakeholder group felt that the development of this TPP was an extremely worthwhile endeavour, and really welcomed the fact that this was being developed. So bringing all of this together, the target product profile synthesizes a number of inputs, and the high-level clinical parts of this, some of which were informed by the information MDC provided from their clinical trials database Discovery, are outlined here. So we need to be specific about the primary indication and patient population. We need to be very specific in terms of defining the treatment goals and the requirements for efficacy in adverse events. Thinking of the patient, how we're going to provide and deliver a new treatment, the signs and the duration of which we want to see an effect, and the clinical outcomes and measures that are important to be measured and monitored in order to validate whether or not an effective outcome is being achieved. And in the context of clinical trials, what types of measurements would be taken, such as cognitive scales, as well as quality of life assessments. All of these link through to what will ultimately be determined on the drug label, and how that would be reimbursed by organizations such as NICE. The target product profile is accessible via Alzheimer's Research UK, and takes these specific product specifications and gives much more detail and granularity, as you can see here. I don't intend to run through all of these. I've mentioned the overall clinical goals. Here are, both the product profile, the base case, and the optimistic case for each of these indications, and these will be made accessible and available to the community in due course, if not already. But you can see, for example, in terms of cognitive and memory scores, there are a variety of measurements that are needed to be taken, and scores which will be used to validate whether or not something is being effective. Similarly for efficacy in adverse events, and finally in terms of clinical trials and study duration and the outcomes that we would hope to see. So, as I've described, the target product profile is an important route for innovators developing new therapies. It importantly brings together all of the information about drug discovery and development that are required by innovators, and what is required then to bring this forward to the marketplace. By working together with Alzheimer's Research UK, MDC has been able to help identify some of the critical evidence and data that have led to this TPP. And we are very fortunate and glad to have been involved in that process. And want to see this being used by innovators, and for us to be helping those innovators in future drug discovery and development. Finally, I would like to thank a number of colleagues who have been critical in this work. At MDC, my colleague Gemma Holliday from our bioinformatics group, who did all of the novel informatics that I've described. My colleagues Bev Isherwood and Jessica Lee from our patient-focused partnership group, Nicola Heron, our Chief Business Officer, and our previous head of the syndicates group, Alessandra Gaita, who with me and other colleagues previously at Alzheimer's Research UK were involved in much of this early work. So I'd like to leave it there. I thank you very much for your attention, and I'll hand over to the organizer.